Hey everybody, JK here from Animator Island. Welcome to today's live stream. Today we're going to be talking about the old face fin, the shnozaroo, the human nose. Last time we did a regular Monday morning 10 a.m. Eastern live stream, we discussed human eyes. So we're moving down to the nose today, and I think that that's a pretty good indicator that next time we'll be talking about the mouth. And then we'll have most of the face tied down, and we'll just need to talk about proportion and ears and hair and, all the other stuff that goes with it, on and on into forever, because it seems like this process will go on eternally. All right, today we're going to talk about the nose. As we have done in previous live streams, there's going to be a bit of a lecture at the beginning. We're going to go over some theory and things. And then we're going to break some stuff down, go into application and analysis. And we're going to look at noses, hopefully to help me determine what my future style of default nose will look like. Right now, my default style is just kind of a little C shape because, as I say, every time we do one of these live streams, I previously worked mostly in newspaper style comic or newspaper comic style. So my noses were very simplified, and we're going to add some complexity here. And then at the end, if you have any questions, we'll do a short Q&A before we sign off for the day. If you have questions in the meantime, while we're talking, or you want to make some comments, feel free to use the chat, and I'll peek over there every once in a while to check in, make sure I'm not missing anything, and we'll go from there. So think that's all the stuff we have to cover today. I hope you'll be a little patient with me this morning, or whatever time it is where you are. I got up at 4 in the morning because my brain decided that was a good time to come up with a story idea. And so I went to the library with my laptop and I wrote 6,500 words, which I didn't intend to do. But, when things get rolling, and you're doing creative work, if you could stay in that zone as long as possible, you should do it. So I knew I had a live stream to do a little later at 7:30 or so. I went back to bed for an hour and then got up to come and do this live stream. So if I'm not super sharp this morning, or if I start falling asleep, that's why. But we're gonna just plow ahead and see how it goes. All right, so we're starting off with a lecture today on the nose. There are a couple things that we want to talk about before we fire up the iPad and we get to the details of the nose. And the first thing that I want to mention is just how stationary the nose is. This is something that, as animators, we need to keep in mind. The nose is kind of this concrete landmark in the middle of the face that we can always use as a landmark, as something to refer back to. And we'll talk a little more about that later in the lecture. But it's something that I want to keep in mind, and I want everyone else to keep in mind too. Our eyes, in terms of their shape and such, are very flexible. We have a lot of muscle around here, a lot of movement in the eyebrows and the eyes. We can do all sorts of things and in different symmetry and all kinds of stuff like that. In the mouth too, super expressive. We can open it really wide, or we can shut it, purse it. We have a lot of flexibility in this area. We have a lot of flexibility in this area to a degree. I mean, obviously there's still solid features, but we got a lot of muscles around there. When it comes to the nose, there's not a lot going on there. We have some bone and we have cartilage, but no matter how much we wiggle our nose, it's still pretty stationary. And typically, you're not going to get a lot of expression out of moving the nose. You're going to get more expression in the design of the nose, if that makes sense. So the early process of designing a character's nose is going to be really important, especially as animators, because you're not going to get as much expression in the nose as you will in the eyes and the mouth and other bodily features. So I think that that's really wise to keep in mind. Now, I will fire up the iPad and we'll jump in. We're going to talk a little bit about the nose in the same way that we discussed the eyes last time. So last time we talked about how essentially the eyes can be represented via very simple forms and very simple shapes and lines, and they can go very complicated depending on what we're after as artists and how we want to express the nose. And I'm sorry, the eyes. And so the same goes for the nose. Um, the nose is interestingly almost the part of the face that you can lose and still not lose a ton. It will alter the character, don't get me wrong, but when we're looking at some examples coming up, you could take away a character's nose and you're still going to get a lot of expression because, as I said, a lot of it comes from the eyes and the mouth. If you take away a character's eyes, it's not going to be the same. It's not going to give you expression. It's not going to feel like an interactable character in a sense. You could sometimes get away with it. If you know the show Star Trek: Next Generation, Geordi LaForge had a visor, right, which he still had his eyebrows to work with, but a lot of his expression had to be done elsewise. And the actor actually discussed how much of a challenge that was because it had taken away this major aspect of the human face. And so if you want to remove eyes, you can, but it's going to be really hard. If you want to remove the mouth, again, you can do it, but it'll be very hard. But if you lose the nose, it's not going to be nearly as dramatic as these other features. And as we continue to go into this world where emojis are used so much, that's one area you can see this. Most emojis, well, a lot of them anyway, don't have noses because you could lose that and you're still going to be able to maintain a lot of the expression and such. So let's continue in on today's lecture and we'll talk about um, essentially reduction or some symbolism of noses and things like that. The different ranges that we can go when it comes to artistic noses. So if we start up here in the upper left, you see that this is a character who was designed without a nose. It maybe not the whole character, like other poses and other expressions may have had a nose, but in this case, the artist decided to just take the nose off the character. And this works. I mean, it looks, I don't want to say weird. It doesn't look realistic, right? But it still has the full expression. You get the idea of what's happening here, and it kind of lends itself to a symbolic charm in a sense when you have it this way. So this is one example of the extreme that you can go to on one end, where you just eliminate the nose entirely. If we move over to the next one, you'll see that this nose, which is very kind of anime style nose, though animation or anime specifically has a wide variety. But this nose is essentially just a triangle. It's this little dot kind of mark that, we can zoom in all the way. It really is just kind of like this triangular mark on the face. And I zoomed in so far that I can't even make that mark with this pencil. So let me grab a different one real quick. But we're looking at like this nose that's just kind of this shape, right? This little triangle shape. And that's a nose that you can get away with because it's going to just represent the nose rather than actually be it. And in this case, it's actually kind of representing the shadow that happens under the ball of the nose. So that's an option that's available to you. And, depending on how simple you want to go, that's a way you could do this. Got a comment from Maria. Hey, Maria, good morning. Or afternoon, wherever you are. It's interesting to think that such a prominent feature really doesn't represent expression. It's a feature we endow with character rather than as expressing character on its own merit. Yes, I would agree. And it is interesting because it's not something I had really thought about until I sat back and prepared this lecture. I was just like, oh my gosh, now that I think about it, the nose doesn't really move. We don't really use it for expression, but it completely defines us. And we'll talk about that in a little bit too. In a sense, the nose is like your most important facial feature because like if you cover your mouth, then people are still going to probably know who you are. If you put on sunglasses, people are still going to know who you are. But when you change the nose, it dramatically alters things, which is really fascinating. I have a story to tell you about that in a little while. But yeah, agreed. So getting back to this, we have kind of option number two, right? Option number one is no nose. Option number two is having a very, very simplified nose to the point where it's barely a mark on the screen or on the page. And moving over to this next character, this nose is It's got the bridge of the nose coming straight down, and then it has the kind of ball of the nose, but it's also dramatically simplified. I mean, dramatically simplified. A lot of the rest of this character is reasonably complex, but the nose is just very flat and very symbolic in a sense. So that's kind of taking this to the next level where we're adding some more of the nose, but it's still not going to be what we would consider, you know, a realistic style nose. Now we're getting a little bit more into realism, not entirely, but a little bit more. So this nose is subtle, but we have many of the main elements. We've got the bridge of the nose, we've got the ball of the nose, we have a wing of the nose, we have the nostrils. And as we're going to see, these are all aspects of the nose that will help you to define it when you're doing a drawing or creating a character. Now, for me, this nose is lovely. This is a really beautiful, elegant solution where they didn't go too heavy, right? But they didn't leave it off entirely or just use, one little mark or something. So I think probably going forward as we enter into the analysis portion, you're going to see a lot of noses that are similar to this for what I'm shooting for in the future. I really dig this. This is really, really nicely done and just beautiful line quality overall and just things like that. So then we continue to move closer toward a more realistic style. But this is still, it's still simplified to a degree. It's still, and it's interesting because here we have one of those rare instances where the nose can be a little expressive because you'll see that the nostrils are not even, they are at slight tilt. But the reason for that is really the mouth because it's very hard to get the nose to just kind of go up like that without actually altering your whole mouth. So even though the mouth has affected the nose here and the expression includes the nose, it's not really dependent on the nose because we could make that nose flat and it would still read as that sort of expression. It just wouldn't be as pushed. It wouldn't be as nice, to be honest. But we see here we have a little bit more form, we have a little bit more dimension, we have some extra shadows and things. And so this nose is getting a little closer to that highly realistic style. And then finally, we have something that is much more realistic. This is still not, photorealistic. It's not hyper realistic, but it's going to be as close as we go for this lecture. I would not personally want to go any further than this. This is honestly too far towards hyperrealism for me. And I've said in the past, hyperrealism just isn't for me. It's not my cup of tea. I appreciate how much time and effort it takes, but I would rather look at photographs if I'm going to look at something that's hyperrealistic. I just would. I think one of the beautiful things about art is that we can take reality and kind of almost get to another level of it via representation. We can say more. It's almost like poetry, right? Poetry can say more than just everyday language because there's this feeling behind it, there's just this symbolism behind it, and so we can express ourselves in a way that kind of even goes beyond just a physical world outside of our window. So when it comes to noses and in general, I am definitely shooting for something that is a little more stylized and a little more representational rather than something hyper realistic. But in terms of noses, I did want to make note that this is kind of the range that you can get. There's going to be a ton of variety within that because noses can come in all shapes and sizes. But depending on what you're shooting for, you can either get something very realistic or you can get almost or even no nose at all. And so those are options. All right. So next up, we have the parts of the nose. And we're going to keep things pretty simplified here. We've talked about this in previous videos. These aren't heavy anatomy studies. They're really worth doing heavy anatomy studies, but there's a lot of resources out there that will give you all of the anatomy and everything. So I'm going to simplify some things, but we're going to talk about kind of the core elements of the nose that we need to keep in mind when we're working on it. Now we can forego some of these elements or even all of them if you go with no nose, although that would be pointless to break down the parts of the nose, but we can forego many of these elements, but these are kind of what you want to keep in mind while you're drawing and while you're animating so that you can keep that form because the nose is one of those, as I said, landmarks, and it's heavy on form. the more form we can get into that nose, the more dimensional our character is probably going to feel in terms of just aesthetics, appearance. So, regarding the nose here, we have the different elements. First, we have the bridge of the nose that starts up here between the eyes and comes down. Now, technically, the bridge of the nose is almost just this top part, but I refer to the whole length of the nose as the bridge. Personally, it's just helpful for me to keep that in mind. But keep in mind that there's only a bit of bone at the actual bridge of the nose, and then there's just cartilage underneath that. So if you break your nose, you've either damaged the cartilage or you've broken the actual bone between your eyes, which would not be fun at all. Um, uh, the nose is, in a sense, almost not necessarily designed to be broken, but it's like a shock absorber, right, for your face, because this can get damaged without harming your actual head. At any rate, so we have the bridge of the nose that starts at the top and goes down towards the ball of the nose, which we'll get to in a minute. But one thing to consider is that the bridge of the nose is where a lot of the design elements will come into play, because you can change the bridge of the nose to something thick, something thin, something long, something short. Where the bridge is, and even within the bridge, the definition that you decide to put there will dramatically alter your character. So that's something that it really pays to keep in mind while you're designing characters. And if you struggle to design characters that look different, one of the key places that you might want to try some things and experiment and play is with the nose, because you can really change the look of a character based on their nose, and specifically kind of on that bridge area. Now, this purple section in the middle here called transitions. This is not technically the nose, or it depends on how you look at it. If we look at this photograph, this kind of side plane here, that's not quite the bridge, but it's kind of ancillary to the bridge. This is what I would call the transitions. And the reason that I like to remember this is it's the thing that doesn't just make the nose slapped on the character's face, right? This is the area that's like the connector piece. I wanted to call it a bridge, right, between the nose and the face, but I couldn't because we already have a bridge. And then I wanted to call it the wings of the bridge, but I couldn't because we already have the wings. So I'm calling them transitions. And I think that it's a really useful area to keep in mind as an artist, because it's going to help you to remember that there's still some dimensionality there. It's not just nose to flat plane, it's nose to slight plane to additional plane to a million planes, because face is very complicated. But this area can really help you, because if you keep it in mind while you're drawing it, this is an area that you can play with light and shadow a little bit more. You can, put in some heavier brush strokes if you're going for more of a painterly style. You generally aren't going to do anything with line around this area, but you could still keep it in mind. And that can really help you as you're defining your character and as you're adding dimensionality to your work. Continuing on, we have the ball of the nose. It's this fun little bit in the very front, this squishy bit. There's not as much cartilage there, so you can actually squeeze the ball of your nose, and it wiggles around if you jam it with your finger. The ball of the nose is a great spot to also get. It tends to be an area that can, how do I put this? It either can add or take away elegance from the nose and the face, right? So the ball of the nose, if you treat it delicately, you'll have a more delicate face typically, and you'll have a more delicate nose at the very least. If you treat it harsher or larger or very angular or things like that, you're going to get a very different result. So the ball of the nose, like the bridge of the nose, is going to be pretty important there. And then next up, we have the wings of the nose. That's kind of the area that comes and connects the ball with the transitions with the rest of the face and things like that. And if you're going to add line, typically we'll add line at the wings. Not always, but that's a nice spot, because there's enough of a definition in this area around the nose that you can you can get away with putting line in there. If you put too much line in the nose, it's not gonna look right because the nose is generally so flowing into the rest of the face. But the wings are one of those spots that's a little less um, flowy. And so you can typically get a little bit extra dimension in there. And then finally, you have the nostrils. Some people avoid nostrils in their characters. Some people add nostrils in the characters. I think it adds a nice sense of realism. And one of the nice things about the nostrils is that you can get a lot of contrast in there because uh, light gets there's so much form around it that light generally doesn't get up into the nostrils. So if you're going to add some contrast, and you can see that especially on this realistic nose on the side, this photograph, this is the highest contrast point of the entire nose because light's just not getting up into there. And so you can use that to your advantage to add line, to add depth, and to add darkness or shadow to your nose. Um, there are other smaller aspects of the nose that we could talk about, but honestly, I think that these are the bits that are really the most important in my experience. So I like to simplify it down to this point. By all means, study the full anatomy, really get in there and think about things. One note that I would make about the nostrils before we continue on is that nostrils are where things can go bad real fast. Um, you need a light touch to do nostrils well because nostrils tend to trigger our symbolism receptors very quickly. What I mean by that is, for example, a pig has very particular nostrils that if you draw them simplified, it will look like a pig nose, like super fast, because we're just used to seeing that. And so the human nose can instantly transform into like a pig nose just by changing the nostrils a little bit. So you do have to be cautious and careful when you're drawing nostrils. In my own experience to this point, I find that drawing nostrils um, as kind of like this slight teardrop shape, almost like an extended comma, right? Because a comma would be like this sort of thing. Well, no, it's a quotation mark. Comma's upside down, right? Wait, what's a comma look like? I can, yeah, okay. Comma's upside down. But if we look at it as this sort of teardrop shape with a little bit of an extension, you can keep it simple without overwhelming your audience or without making it so dramatic that you're like, oh, that's clearly a hole. Um, I think the worst thing you can do is to make it like literally an oval. If you put two ovals there, unless you're going for a very particular style or you want to stylize in a certain way, I would avoid just making it a straight circle because it's going to end up being like that pig nose. It's gonna mess up the character's face more times than not. Not always, but a lot of times it will do that. So those are some thoughts on the kind of anatomy and form of the nose. I'm going to make the screen a bit bigger for a second because I want to talk about this idea that I talked about a little bit before, how the nose really defines us. So a little bit of a story, real quick. I had a friend who I knew for a long time, and she had a very distinct nose. Wasn't good, wasn't bad. It wasn't like I'm judging those. It was just very distinct. I also have a very distinct nose. I don't know if I can. I have like this crook in my nose, and it's a big honking nose. It's one of my defining features. I could change it, I guess, via surgery, but I'm not going to. That's just who I am. But my friend had this very distinct nose, and uh, just went through her life normally. Everything, just continuing on living life. But one day she went to a doctor, a new doctor, and her doctor said, "Do you have trouble? Are you tired a lot?" And she's like, "Well, yeah, actually, I am pretty tired a lot of the time." And he's like, "I thought so because as I'm looking at your nose and as we're doing our exam, I recognized some signs that you may have a certain facial kind of anomaly that exists up in the bridge of the nose which is stopping you from being able to breathe as well as if you didn't have that there. And so probably the reason you're tired is because you're not sleeping well because you keep uh, half suffocating while you're sleeping. And this was news to the girl because she had never heard this before. And she said, well, is there something we can do about it? And he said, yeah, there is. We can actually perform a procedure that will remove that aspect of things and it will open up your airways. You'll be able to breathe easier. You should sleep better. Overall, it's really good for your health. And my friend was like, great, let's do that. And the doctor said, well, hang on a second, just so you're aware, it's going to change the shape of your nose. Like, there's no way we can get your nose to look like it is currently while we take that aspect out. And she's like, okay, well, that's fine. I don't care. And he said, okay, I need you to understand that when I say it's going to change the shape of your nose, it's actually going to change your whole face. Like, people aren't going to recognize you. And she was like, that's what are you talking about? Like, you're going to change just the bridge of my nose and people aren't going to recognize me? And he's like, yeah, honestly, that's what's going to happen. Not because we're purposefully trying to change your face, but just because that's what will happen. Well, I mean, obviously breathing well is important. So she said, we're going to do it anyway. So they went ahead with the procedure, and for a couple of weeks, she had to wear this kind of like splint sort of thing on her face that was a protector. But by and large, things started healing up, and one day she was able to take that off and just walk around normally again. Well, the next day after she had done that, she came into the room where we were all were, and literally none of us recognized her. Literally none of us. We thought it was a different person that we had never met before. We were introducing ourselves to this person we had never met just because the bridge of her nose had changed. That is the power of a nose in terms of this feature, this representation of character. That is how powerful a nose can be. And it's not something that I don't even know if I'd have believed it. Like, she was a little bit incredulous when the doctor told her about that. I would have also been until I saw it live and in person. Like, she looked like a different person. It was so weird to hear her voice coming out. And honestly, her voice had changed slightly too, right? Because a lot of our voice comes up and in through our nasal cavities and things. That's why if you hold down your nose, you have this like nasally voice, right? Or if you have a sinus infection, you sound slightly different. So when they had removed that blockage, she actually sounded different and looked different. We were all like, I don't know, this is weird because are you sure you're the same person? But that's sort of the power of a nose. So something to keep in mind, both in reality and in your art. This can make a significant difference. Okay, hoop us back up, and I want to talk about one last thing, and we'll jump into analysis after that. Um, there is a shape on the face, which we see here in this example. It's kind of a triangular shape that goes from, you could do this from a couple different landmarks, but I like to do the center of the eyes, regardless of where the eyes are looking. I'm not saying pupils, but the center of the eyes, down to the bottom of the ball of the nose. If you take a look at this shape, you will note that um, if you keep track of the shape, you will be able to better keep track of the proportions of any character or person you draw because each person has a slightly different triangle. Now, that triangle will change based on if you look down or you look up or you look to the side or any particular angles. But um, those proportions, other than the fact that it'll change in perspective, will generally always remain the same. That is a really nice landmark to have. You can squinch up your eyes and you can move around your face and you can get a lot of expression and movement and things move around and slide around a lot on the face. But this triangle is something that generally will stay very much the same. These are hard landmark to your face. So if you wanted to design a character, you could design that character. I'm just going to use simple forms for the things, but you could design a character so that the triangle is kind of this shaped, right? Which is similar to what we have on our reference here. And you could design a character that has maybe like a very low nose, And so the shape would end up being more along this line. Or you could design a character that has very wide set eyes. So you might have it more like this. And then your triangle is going to be more along these lines. And this triangle is going to remain the same. It's going to be a sort of measurement you can use. And as animators, especially, this can really be useful because if you ever struggle to keep things consistent, what you need to remember is that you need to find these sort of landmarks and these sort of um, constants, right? That you can refer back to again and again. So anytime you wanted to draw this character, you would remember that that triangle needs to be a certain size and shape. It again will move in perspective, but it's always going to be those general proportions. And so that can be a really useful thing to know about while you're animating and while you're doing things in that regard. Marie says Barbara Streisand refused cosmetic surgery on her nose long ago because she knew it would affect her voice. Yep. If somebody breaks their nose, it can have even subtle or not so subtle effects on the voice. And if you have cosmetic or even surgery that's not necessarily cosmetic, it can change things. So yep, it's a fascinating thing, the nose, the whole face, human form, everything about it. The universe is an amazing place. All right, so that's what we've got for today on the lecture side of things. We're going to fire up the little pop-up and we're going to move on to application, analyzing the nose for Reiki style. Now, I mentioned this 1,000 times at this point. Well, it's not really 1,000, but I mentioned this over and over again. My goal here is to purposefully and intentionally change my own art style so that I can make it closer to what I would like personally going forward. What I want to create as a default style for myself. So here we have a front 3/4 side views of the nose and then a no kind of chart at the end, which we'll talk about. I find this useful to find things that you don't want to be. And that way you can kind of avoid that as you're going forward. Along with these nose, I would probably also draw the kind of nose that I would normally do. No nose. No nose. So we're going to jump in. We're just going to start analyzing a little bit. Let me grab a drink before we fully get into that. And we're going to go over what about each of these noses I particularly like and why I would want to incorporate some aspect of them into my style. Now, if we just take kind of a zoomed out look for a second, you'll see that all these front noses tend to, except maybe the last one there, they tend to represent the bridge of the nose, either with a highlight or a shadow somewhere. And so that's something to keep in mind because one of the things that I want to keep in my art style is line work. I want to still be able to draw with just line if I want to, and I can add color and shading and shadow in where appropriate. So some user says light mode madman. I assume you mean light mode on the iPad or on Procreate. Look, this is what it came with, and I like bright colors, so I'm fine with it. I could probably always try dark mode at some point. I actually have my laptop set to kind of always dark mode and a yellowish tone, which I guess is better for the eyes. Because I just mentioned earlier, I was up at 4 a.m. writing, so I tend to do writing when it's dark for some reason, and I set the laptop that way, but not the iPad. The iPad is for daytime, and so it stays in light mode. Okay, so this first nose that we have here that is technically front view, but it's a little bit tilted, and we can tell that it's a little bit tilted because, oops, I'm not drawing on top. Tell it's a little bit tilted because it's got this nostril is slightly different than this nostril. It's more narrow. But for all intents and purposes, we're going to consider this a front view nose for the time being. So what we see here again is that we have a little bit of shadow up here. and we have highlights right on the bridge and then on the ball of the nose. And there's some nice gradient work and some subtle differences on this transition part, right, that we mentioned before. Uh, this area here is kind of this transition part, and so we're getting a little bit of definition in there by changing the colors very subtly, but obviously enough to make a change of plane. But in terms of line, what we're really focused on regarding the line is the wings of the nose, which are right here and here, and where you have the nostrils themselves. And again, we kind of have that elongated teardrop shape a little bit rather than just a flat out circle or something like that. So already we're seeing that in this nose, which I think is very appealing of a nose, the artist is using far less line and far more in terms of shading and highlights and just tone changes to represent this nose. But it's, I think, really pleasant nose. The ball of the nose is rather wide, and then we have kind of smaller wings and the nostrils under the ball. The bridge of the nose on this one is actually pretty wide, um, for the most part, and our kind of triangle to the center of the eyes. Man, I keep turning off that layer. Stop doing that. Sorry. I should like lock something or whatever. I'll make some marks up here so that I can undo to those marks. Anyway, if we look at that triangle, the triangle is, well, actually, that's not even the proper triangle because we need center of eyes. Center of eyes is going to be over here. So we actually have this kind of elongated horizontal triangle rather than a strictly vertical triangle. Now, if we move down to the next piece, this one is going to be a much more vertical triangle than the last one. So the last one was more like this, and this one is more elongated. Not even probably to the extreme that I did there, but it's still going to be longer. In terms of the bridge of the nose here, we have almost no bridge. Um, we have no bridge really defined dramatically. We still have this sort of transition, right, area, but the bridge is almost exclusively defined by that highlight there. And so that makes the whole nose flatten out some. And so this person's nose, this character's nose, is more like almost a button nose that we would say, because it's mostly the ball of the nose, and even the ball doesn't have a ton of depth to it. So this nose is a bit more flat, and it's a bit more shallow in terms of the bridge of the nose and things. But again, we have the wings that are our main definition points, and then the nostrils, which are significant to the level of contrast. Now, an interesting thing about this one versus the other one is this one uses a line to represent the, oh, nuts, I can't remember the name of it now. I gotta memorize all my anatomy better, but there's this piece of the nose that goes from the ball down into the upper part of the lip. Has a specific name, and forgive me, I can't remember it. If somebody in the chat remembers, you can post it. Otherwise, don't worry about it. But you'll see in the comparison of these two images, one uses just this top one uses just color to differentiate that transition, and then this one down here actually uses a line. And this is something that I've been experimenting with personally, because there's going to be a difference between doing your nostrils with nothing connecting them like this, and then there's a difference between doing your nostrils where you have this sort of extra bit that separates the two. And again, this is that part that connects the ball of the nose to the rest of the face. But these two things are options, right? We have none and with that extra little line. So I haven't decided which way I want to go yet with a default style. I think it's going to be really dependent. I will say that I enjoy drawing this one more. So just strictly from a personal comfort sort of thing. I like drawing that line in. I don't know if it's necessarily the best idea or if it's what I want to do going forward, generally speaking, but I like doing it. So I'm much more comfortable connecting those than I am not connecting them. Um, and then so we talked a little bit about how the ball of this nose is slightly wider, and that is this sort of oval shape. It tends to be septum. I believe it is the septum. Maria says it's the septum. I believe that it is the septum, unless the septum is this bit. No, I think that's something else at the top of the. But I think you're right. Forgive me. Again, not an anatomy lesson today, but thank you for chiming in. I appreciate it, and I think that you are correct. So this the ball of the nose, we can make many different shapes and forms. This ball is much more rounded, right, versus the top one. But this elongated, a horizontal oval shape tends to be one that I'm drawn to, and we'll see that I think in a bunch of these examples, or maybe we won't. But that just seems to be in my head. This is the sort of shape that I'm comfortable starting with as I'm doing kind of my rough, and then I fill in details on top of that, but we'll see if that's the case as we go forward. All right, continuing along. Here we have the bridge of the nose significantly defined by shadow rather than line or anything. Again, this keeps coming back around to just keeping this aspect of the nose as uh, more form rather than line. And once more, we have most of our definition coming in the nostrils, in the septum, if that is indeed what this is, and then subtly in the wings here. The other ones have much more definition in the wing, whereas this nose does not have nearly as much definition in the wing there. But what we're continually coming across is that when there is line, the line tends to be in the nostril septum and the uh, pretty subtle in the wings. Um, so that's something that we want to keep in mind, or I want to keep in mind while I'm working, because that's going to be kind of what I'm going towards. And then uh, all these noses tend to have a highlight somewhere related to the ball of the nose, because the ball of the nose tends to be where a lot of highlight is. And so I'm wondering if there's some way to represent that with line, whether that's, an actual like mark, whether that's making everything else be slightly darker, because we're going to have to talk shadow at some point. That's too dark, but I'm wondering if there's something I can do um, to represent that. Maybe we'll actually, as I'm looking over here, this might actually be a solution, but we'll get to that one when we get to it. In the meantime, we'll move down to this nose, which once again, we have very little in terms of definition on the bridge. We do have some. This is an interesting nose because the bridge is kind of smaller here and really widens out. Most noses will do that to a degree, but this one is a significant artistic decision. And we have our transitions here that you can definitely tell is what moves the nose from the bridge into the face, the rest of the face. And then in terms of line, or at least contrast, because I'm not even sure we'd go all the way to line here. We have this line in the nostrils and the septum, and then we have the wings, which are almost not even lined. They're more just like deep, rich color and that sort of thing. So now we have much more in these last two on the front facing ones. We have much more line work and much less, well, at least color, but a little less shading. We still have shading on this one. We've got cross hatching on the bottom one, or on both of them. But here is interesting because this is the only one that has really used a line for the bridge of the nose, which comes up into the eye socket, the brow, right, comes up into there. And that's something I really like, trying to connect that brow line. So if I'm drawing a nose or the whole face really, I will sometimes come down on I'll sometimes come down into the bridge from the brow line, and then I know where the eyebrow actually goes, and then the eye will sit somewhere in this neighborhood. Um, so I like that brow line. I like that connection between the nose, the bridge of the nose, and the eyebrow. Whether or not I use that as a sort of default or not, I don't know, but it's something that I like doing and I like seeing it there. It seems to add that chunkiness and form that we've talked about in previous ones. At any rate, this nose up here, I really like how they've used straights in this nose. They're curved straights, but they're still straights. Whereas some of these other noses, we get a lot less of the straights and much more curvature, which is fine. You know, noses come in all shapes and sizes, but this sort of definition of the sides and then the top of the ball of the nose and how it comes down and then the nostrils and things. Like I really like how angular they've gotten this nose to be while still keeping it kind of elegant, right? It's not super what you would maybe call masculine nose, um, but it's got still that straight line quality to it, which I appreciate. So make note here. Um, So I'm gonna make note of that. I like that aspect of it, so that might be something that I wanted to do. The one thing that we can look at in these two noses is this line on top of the ball. This one has several lines on top of the ball. I like that aspect. It's kind of a nice definition of where the bridge of the nose meets the ball of the nose. It's not really realistic. Most people's noses, you would never see a definitive line there. But in terms of an artistic choice, I kind of like that. I appreciate that they did that. So that may be something that I want to incorporate or think about. I think when I mentioned before, I like starting with kind of this oval shape, this elongated oval shape. So maybe I start with this kind of elongated oval shape, and then when I go back to define the nose, that's where I'll kind of pull elements from. Um, well, I made that way too much of a ball. Maybe I'll pull elements from that to kind of define the edges of the nose without including this top plane of the ball, without going all the way around like a Mario nose. So that might be an option. It's just something I need to kind of keep in mind and play around with and stuff. I should have just left that rather than sitting here and undoing it all, but whatever. Undoing it. Okay, let's move on to 3/4 view noses. This is where things kind of get interesting because um, with you can add dimension and qualities to the bridge of the nose and the depth of the nose from a front view. But for the most part, where noses really shine is when you start turning your head, right? Like I almost look different in my front view of my face versus when I turn my head and you see this very defined nose and these very particular angles. I'm actually not a huge fan of my own nose, but it is the one I have. And as Michael J. Fox once said about his height, this is what I was given, so I'm going to work with it. So I might not love my own face in the profile view. That's my least favorite view of myself. But um, it's interesting to see how when you turn the nose, that's when things really start to pop. And that's when things get really interesting, in my opinion. Okay, so just kind of going through these 3/4 ones a bit. One thing I really like about this is the change in color between the underside of the ball of the nose and even the wings. It kind of treats the ball of the nose and the wings as one triangular shape. And I like this sort of triangular shape that's going on here. I'm not sure how I feel about the transitions on this nose being a, a different hue than than the rest. This is a kind of almost a popular thing to do, or at least it was in the past couple of years. I don't even know if it's as popular as it used to be, but people used to make these very red noses on their characters with very defined edges to that nose. And I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, it makes sense in terms of uh, generally this part of your face along your cheeks and in your nose are going to be the most not necessarily red. Well, a lot of times it'll be more red, but it'll be the highest level of contrast to the skin in that area, and then also along your ears, based on blood flow and things. But or is it blood flow, or I think it's the amount of blood that gets closest to the skin. At any rate, so I don't dislike it, but I don't know that I would want to do that for myself, for sort of a default style. I will always, hopefully, if I'm doing color, I will always get some variation of color in the nose, but this sort of harsh line between the bridge and the transition is not necessarily something I love. I think it's done better in this first one over here, right? Because it's a little more subtle and it continues to blend outward from there. This this one I really like the shape of, but in terms of the color and that choice of how they did the coloring, this doesn't do anything for me because it feels too slapped on a flat plane. It loses that transition, and I think that that's one of the reasons we want to think about transitions because it can be very useful. Kind of all over the place here. We're just going to jump around a bit, I guess. I like the dimensional quality of this nose. We're starting to get more of a round shape here, and so this is a dangerous nostril, or almost getting to a um, you know I don't say it's just dangerously close to a circle. I would want to subdue that nostril a little bit, but I just like the swooping lines of this. I like how this front part of the nose is thicker, darker line. Not even darker, but it's thicker, which represents that shadow that comes from underneath, like this one. And so I think that that excels really well there. We do not have a connection on septums or anything here. We have a little bit of one there, but not a line. And again, we have this kind of uh, lines on top to define the ball of the nose, which I think is interesting. This one is so blurry. From a distance, I like this nose, but you can't really even see anything. A lot of these are going to be blurry. The tricky thing about just yanking a nose off of a piece of art is, generally speaking, the nose isn't the focal point of the piece. So the person who does it is not jamming that up right against the screen. And as a result, when you try and blow it up to analyze it, it gets very pixelated. You need to find some really high resolution stuff in order to zoom in on the nose. This piece in the middle here, you have probably seen in a bunch of other live streams. This is one of my favorite pieces because of the dimensional qualities to it. I really like how elegant this nose is while remaining dimensional. It's a great nose. This is just a lovely. If I could do stuff like this, I don't think it's necessarily what I'd stylistically, it's not necessarily what I want for my default style, but the quality of it is definitely something that draws me in. I really want to try and capture that quality. So I really like that one. It's pleasant, pleasing to look at. This one too, I really think is appealing. Now this has the entire bridge of the nose in a pretty significant harsh line, and it comes up to the brow line. So that aspect is something that appeals to me. But the nose itself just has these lovely shapes, and you've got the wing in there, and you've got a little bit of definition here at the top, right, for the nostril or for the ball of the nose. Really nice stuff. Really, really pleasant to look at. It's very. It does a lot with not a ton of line or ton of shading. Really like that one. This one also has the bridge of the nose defined more. This has kind of this triangular shape to the bottom without actually showcasing the ball or the lower part or septum or anything. So that's interesting. Um, Again, not exactly what I want for my default style, but I do like this swooping line that really uh, just really flows well, and it's really nice. This line, this nose here, this might actually be the one from earlier. Um, Again, I appreciate this one. It's just elegant. It's got this nice lightness to it. It's defined, but it's not over defined. And so I really, really appreciate the restraint that the artist showed on that one. Over here, I really, really like this one. We have the definition of the bridge, but it's light. It's very subtle, but it's still a line. And so that's really nice. And then they've gone for it in certain areas. uh, it's the bridge and this wing are both very light and delicate, but then the ball of the nose defined, which is actually pretty sharp. It's got that angular quality, but they really went for it, especially with this line here that is rich and dark and deep. It almost hints at the other nostril on the other side, but it doesn't actually necessarily show it. And then we have the nostril here, which is, again, that nice teardrop elongated shape. And just look at this shadow right here specifically. That's just so nice. It's just so angular and nice and well done to have this, like, because this artist could have easily rounded things out a bit more like this, and it would have been a lovely nose as well. It's not like that's wrong or bad, but they really decided they were going to put in those corners and those angles. And so I appreciate that. And so this is one that I'll kind of star to come back to and look at more often because I think it's super nice. Don't get carried away with the star there, JK. You can just, okay. Um, I think this one is super nice. It's got a lot of the qualities that I'm looking for. Even look, there's a bit of a line right at the top there to define the ball of the nose and separate it from the bridge. Really, really just lovely stuff that I'm a big fan of that one. I obviously like all of these because I put them into our analysis here, but that one's really, really nice. Um, oh, this one is a different one. This one almost looks like it's either the same artist or almost the same character. But again, we have the bridge defined, and it's nice point that comes to this point. Now, on the other end, this one does not have quite. It's still got some straights, but things are much more smoothed out. Things are much more nice and curvy and just it feels nice. This nose just kind of feels nice and bulbous and just pleasant. This is a character I'd want to hang out with for some reason. Like I don't know anything about this character, but based on their nose, I would just be like, yeah, I want to talk to them. Uh, for whatever reason, that's the thing that I get out of it. It looks like they used this as part of the wing, and then we have a very subtle nostril here. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I don't know if let me take that out a second. Do we need that? I'm not sure we even need that. I mean, it's obviously an artistic choice, but I'm not sure we need that wing there. I think it's actually stronger without that wing. I see why they did it, and it's fine. I don't think that's the nostril because otherwise that wouldn't have that dark spot there. But it's just a very pleasant nose. We again have these lines on top that kind of define the ball of the nose, and we have the line of the bridge, and we have this lovely triangular shadow. So we've come across this triangular shadow a bunch of times, this kind of rounded triangular shadow that goes underneath the nose. And I have a feeling that that's going to be something that I want to incorporate. So that's a shape and it's a shadow that I really like. And I think I will probably want to try and include that often in my work. This one is interesting because we have a little bit of definition of the bridge here. And then we have the ball defined well. We have a little hint of the top of the ball defined. And then we have barely any of the wing, but it comes into the nostril. The nostril and the wing here are attached in such a way that it makes it one form. Here's an interesting thing that I've learned, and maybe you've heard it in the past as well. The more you can combine line or shapes, especially things like shadows and highlights, into one thing instead of a bunch of tiny little things, generally the more appealing your work is going to become, because the human brain and eye reads it as one thing, but it still retains its dimensional quality. So the fact that the artist here made the wing and the nostril into one form is a really nice addition. They didn't have to do that. They could have put a wing in here and then put a nostril in here, and it would have still been a perfectly fine nose. But by combining those two lines, it adds an even extra interesting quality to it that feels nice, because you're not looking at two individual things where your eye has to like jump around. It's just one nice flow. So that's an interesting thing. Okay, this nose I love. I just, man, I really like this one. It's just very pleasant. This line at the top here, which I think I mentioned back when we were tackling the front view, I just really like that. It pops, it adds this really extra nice thing to it. And then we also have the whole bridge of the nose as a line. It's kind of like separate from the eye, which I guess that's the side plane that we're getting a little bit there. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about that line, but that's okay. The rest of the nose I just really like. It's, again, we've got these angles and these defined forms. We've got defined forms, so I'm going to write that down because we keep coming across it. All right. And it's a really nice nostril. It feels in place. It feels like it's part of the nose. It's not just put on, which is really pleasant and nice. This is from one of the images that was in our chunkiness and form video, which I haven't said it, I think, this time around. So if you are new to these live streams, there is a whole series called Searching for Style, or uh, Quest for Style, or something like that. I can't remember the name of it, but anyway, it's a whole playlist of videos on Animator Island TV over in YouTube, and so we're going through all sorts of different subjects and topics. This is from the Chunkiness and Form live stream and lecture, and so you may recognize it from that. And I love how chunky this nose is. It's got a lot of straights to it. It's got very defined front side of the bridge, side of the nose into the transition here. The wings are enormous on this nose, and we've got the nostril. It's almost like they put the wing on. It's just very sculpted, and it's almost like they sculpted the whole nose, and then they went in and cut out the hole for the nostril. It's just pleasant. It's nice. This is trickier for me because this is so sculptural and painted that I don't know how much I can carry over into my work unless I'm doing something that's particularly sculptural and painted like this. But it's one that I want to always keep in mind because it's really nice. And then these final two, I really enjoy this simplicity, the shape we've got. Again, that kind of, it's actually, in these two, it's not even necessarily an oval. It's kind of like this um, segmented oval scrunched shape. And I think I was watching a tutorial once, it might have even been recently, on noses, and they talked about using this sort of shape as the nose for your bases. So maybe that's something I need to incorporate. I like doing this shape, just this kind of oval. I enjoy doing that, but maybe from there I go back in and I put in this kind of form over top, and just to get more angles and more form in there. I think that might be a really smart thing. And then, oh, here's an interesting one. Remember I mentioned earlier, is there a way to do like the highlight in line? And I think that this does that. This shows the highlight in line. Is it successful? I think it is. I'm not sure that I love it, but it definitely does what it needs to do to show you that this is this extra highlight on the nose. And again, we have this nice subtle line for both the bridge and the top of the ball. So very pleasant. Really dig that one. All right, we have a couple from the side, but not a ton. Profile characters tend to exist, but most of the I didn't say most of the time. For me, when I'm browsing online for art, a lot of profile views tend to be in an anime style, like a hardcore anime style. And as a result, it was harder and harder for me to find something from a side view. Even this top one is technically extreme three-quarter, but I'm going to count it as side view. It's very close. But this is something that was hard for me to find a lot of because typically when somebody does a profile view, they're either going for realism or they're going for an extreme stylized choice. And there's not a ton in between that I've found. I haven't come across it a lot. But to be fair, one of the reasons I probably didn't is because I hesitated to do a search on Pinterest for profile view characters just because I knew then it would get into the algorithm and I would just be inundated with profile views, and I didn't want that in my general gallery. There's probably some workaround. I don't know it. If somebody knows it, feel free to leave a comment in the video or in the chat if you're here live. But I decided not to add that particular search to the algorithm that Pinterest would spit out at me for the rest of my life. I'm still getting random images from like, oh my gosh, you click one thing because you like a certain form or shape, and it's like, oh, you must love that forever. There's a really nice wallpaper of Bowserette, or I don't know, Princess. What's the combination of like Peach and Bowser that's out there? It's Bowserette or something. Anyway, it's really nice wallpaper. I'm not really a fan of that character, but I really like the wallpaper, so I clicked on it, and now I just get 1,000 Princess Peach recommendations constantly, and I'm like, I don't want these Pinterest. Like I've tried to be like, this doesn't interest me, but it just keeps throwing Peach at me, and it's like, look at all this Peach art. I'm like, all right, whatever. I digress. Let's get back to this. So the side view here, I really I enjoy the angular quality of this nose. I enjoy the simplicity. I enjoy the roughness of this sketch. This artist really just put their lines down and then they moved on and they kept going. And I just appreciate that so much. It's got really nice form and it's got really nice angles. It's a smaller nose, but it's really, really well done. This one, we have a very petite nose by comparison to the last, right? And I appreciate like this upturnedness of it. We've got this kind of rounded form at the top. It's actually got like three planes, to be honest, and I'm making a mess of it because this wouldn't go all the way there, but it's almost got these sort of three planes, right? There's this one, and then this one, and then this one, and then we come down into the upper lip. And so I really appreciate that, and I just like the proportions of this one. The nostril here is really nicely done, and we've got just a very subtle shadow for the wing. Very just nicely done nose, and I'm a fan of the butterfly sitting there. It's pleasant. This image or this man. So this nose and face is part of an image of this girl that's just a nice sketch with subtle shading that I have had on my computer for I don't even know how long. It's one of my absolute favorite pieces. It almost ended up in uh, my top six most um, desirable style choices that I kind of put together. But the problem with this one is that I've never been able to find it in anything but like a postage size stamp size of this image. I've looked online over and over and over again. I don't even know who the artist is. I would probably contact them and be like, hey, will you send me a print? I'll give you $50 for just a print of this. I just really love this face. Unfortunately, here it's blurry and it's hard to see well, but we're gonna do our best and analyze it. Um, I love here how we have uh, definitive shapes, and even the front here is almost two lines, right? Like here we have kind of this line and then this line, and they're subtle, but they're almost two different things. But I love this angular quality while keeping it very elegant and very just pleasing and appealing. That would be the word that I use for this face and this nose. It's just a very appealing nose and shape. You have this transition between the bridge and the transition. Um, that I called it, which is nice. And it's done subtly with just a hint of a shadow right there, but it's kind of got that front part of the cheek that comes into the eye socket, and that's just really lovely. All in all, just big fan of this piece. A big fan of that nose. If I can get something that has that line quality and that appeal, I'll be really happy. And then lastly, I think I discussed this before. We have it's a very popular thing, making these really red noses. Here, I think it works better because it's not quite as harsh as that earlier one. But I just really like, I really like that this nose is just kind of rounded and pleasant and nice. Just it's it doesn't have quite the harshness of the angles of this one, which I use the word harsh, but I don't necessarily mean it in a bad way. It's just stronger angles. This one is much more rounded out, but it's pleasant. It's just a pleasant nose, so I like that one too. All right, we're coming down to the home stretch. We're at an hour and 15 minutes. I'm gonna get one more sip of water. We'll go over these nose, and I'm going to nose. We're going to talk about these real quickly, and then I'm going to draw a couple of the noses that I would traditionally draw in my default style as it currently is, and then we'll do a quick review. And then again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. Otherwise, you're welcome to reserve them for when we do a Q&A at the very end, but that's coming, so you might as well ask them now and we can get to them. And if there's no questions, no worries there as well. Interestingly, I find that during my gesture drawing sessions, which we've been doing now almost weekly as well, I tend to get a lot more questions instead of the question and answer portion of the main live stream, but that's fine. Whatever works. Whatever works. Okay, so let's talk about these nose. These are things that I do not want to do for my own personal default art style. Doesn't mean I'll never do them. Doesn't mean that I don't like them. It's just not what I'm looking for. So in this first example, we have that very anime, tiny line, triangle, little bit of a shadow, almost no nose. And I am not interested in that. So I do not want to do a just little representation of a nose. It's just not what I'm after right now. It's nice, it's pleasant, it's just not what I want to do. This next one, which we saw earlier, again, this goes into my no list because it's so symbolic and so graphic that it flattens everything out. I don't dig this nose. I really like this character design and everything, but the nose for me, it doesn't work. It flattens everything so much, which is maybe what they were going for, and that's fine, but it's not what I want to do. I'm curious, just really quickly, forgive me for giving it an attempt, but I wonder what would happen if we put on another sort of nose, um, if we could make it work. I'm just kind of curious for a second. I'll have to give me. So I'm not sure that necessarily I like this one better because the other was kind of designed with that character. But if I wanted to create a character, I would much rather a nose more along these lines than I would that that other nose, which was extremely graphic. So this doesn't exactly fit. I would need to readjust some things and where the mouth is and twists and things. But that would be what I just drew is more along the lines of the nose that I would be interested in doing versus the one that was already there. So I will move that over compared to that original one. Now, the original one is very stylized. It's very nice. It's got that kind of cartoony element. Just not what I'm looking for because it reminds me too much of my old original style, and that's not what I want to do anymore. This nose has almost no line, which is fine, but it just doesn't do anything for me. It almost is like a lighting version of that little triangle from above, right? Like it's just I don't like this. It's tiny, it flattens out. It's not even flat because it's got this nice dimensional quality. It's just not, I don't know. This doesn't do anything for me. The shape underneath the nose here is this like oval, but it's lighter in color, which I don't. I guess it's bounce light, I guess, but I don't like it. I don't like that. I just this one, I've said it doesn't mean I don't like it. This one I actively dislike. I don't like this nose on this character. I'm nothing against the artist. It's just I didn't care for that choice. So that's something that I'd want to avoid. Um, it doesn't just it's pointy. It just doesn't work for me. That one doesn't work for me. This nose is was just kind of like the bridge, and it also kind of didn't work for me to have this line here, and then the highlight, and then this part. It didn't work for me. It's not what I'd want to do. It might work if we added a little bit more to it, but it wasn't what I was looking for. And then this nose, while very cute, um, it didn't work for me either. Uh, I struggle. I was looking at it earlier because I added this one last, and I was just like, why don't I like that? There's aspects of it that I should like. It's got that dimensional quality. It's got things. There's just something about this that doesn't work for me. It might be how I don't know. I don't know what it is exactly. I'll keep thinking about this one, but that's not the noses that I'm looking for when I'm going forward with this. And then finally, I'm going to, and I've talked about this before, in the old days, my noses would be like this. And I'd have a little, so my noses were just like simple C shapes. This is a really ugly drawing, but that's okay. I'm just giving an example. Even when I was doing, a front view, so a front view would have been the eyes together like this, and then I would have put the nose on like this, um, like that. That was kind of my default nose in the past, and I now hate that. Not necessarily in other people's work, but in my own work, I now hate this. Um, and hate is a strong word, but I think that that's the correct word in this case. I don't want to do this. This is like the biggest no. So of all of the things that we've seen today, this is the one that I don't want to do most. And to end on that positive note, let's just go back real quick and we'll look through some of these things and we'll get an idea of what did we learn today. So for starters, this sort of oval, rounded, squished oval shape is something that I'm really drawn to. So that's probably something I want to incorporate into the default style. Haven't decided whether I want to connect the nostrils via the septum using line or not, but we'll continue to think about that. I'm leaning towards yes right now, but I don't know. If we're going to put on wings, then probably we keep them subtle. The ball of the nose tends to be where we have a lot of opportunity for design. And we can connect that to the bridge on 3/4 or side views. Really nice triangular shape under the nose seems to be pleasant in most of these, having just that definition and form. And then I guess lastly, having those angles and those straights seems to really improve things and make things very pleasant and nice to look at and to probably draw as well. Alrighty, cool beans. Well, that concludes the analysis portion of our little live stream for today. And so now I'm happy to open things up to questions and answers. If you have any questions about noses, drawing noses, anything we talked about today, or anything animation or art related, or you want to just go off topic entirely and just talk about anything, you're more than welcome to. Now's your chance. In the meantime, while people are either formulating their questions or deciding that I have literally answered everything you've ever wondered about noses, I will say a couple of things. First, I do this live stream in this sort of format generally every Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. So if you're just joining an hour, if you're watching this recorded after the fact, that's when you can hop on for this particular live stream. As I mentioned in the live stream today before, I've been recently doing some gesture drawing, just kind of as an impromptu thing sometime during the week. Those generally go a lot shorter. We're at an hour and 24 minutes currently. So these lectures and live streams tend to be an hour and a half, 2 hours, things like that. The gesture drawing sessions have been closer to 30 minutes to 45 minutes. So if you're looking for something a little shorter, or if you want to practice your own gesture drawing, then you can always hop on during one of those. We'll have the images up on the screen. You can draw along. You can just watch, whatever works for you. Lots of people chime in during those and ask questions and things. So that's an opportunity and an option for you in terms of other live streams. Now, I don't have that regularly scheduled, which means that you will need to subscribe in some form, probably to have it alert you. Or if you happen to be on Twitter all day, sometimes I will post it before I jump on via the Animator Island account on Twitter. I will jump over to a question/comment. Maria says, "This is so helpful. I'm playing around with an animation right now, and my character's nose has been uncooperative. This will help corral her." Well, I'm glad. I'm glad that that was useful. And I agree and understand exactly what you're talking about. It's the same. So many times that'll be the part of the face that's just like not working. And I think it is because, as we talked about earlier, right, you don't get as much expression in there. And it's just like this thing that's just there all the time. But maybe if we approach it as this foundation and this as this keystone element, a landmark, it will be easier because you'll be like, oh, well, that landmark goes there, and now let's kind of build around it. I don't know. That might be an option. But I'm glad that you found it useful and that um, you're working on some animation stuff. I hope you've shared it with Ferdinand or I, or you could share it with us in the future if you get a chance. Always love to see what you guys are working on. And as always, Maria, thanks for stopping by and sharing insights, because you do a really good job with that. Everybody, though, thank you for stopping by. I really appreciate that. And then that's what I'll probably conclude with, unless we have any other questions. Do have another question. It's Alien Slug King. ASK always has some really good questions. So I figure that in 2D animation, noses get animated, but I wonder if they also get animated in 3D. So that's an interesting point. So in 3D, 3D isn't my area of expertise, so take this with a grain of salt. But typically, from what I know about 3D, there is not as much. There's not as much dedicated to the model regarding the nose as it is everything around the nose. Now, that may not be the case anymore. Now they're putting so much work into the models, which is great. That's what you want. You want that sort of flexibility. But yeah, when you're animating in 2D, especially hand-drawn 2D, because you have to make a choice with every line you make, you tend to make more conscious choices in some senses. Not always, but this is generally what I found. You don't have anything to do it for you. When you're sitting there with, especially if you're working traditionally, if you're rolling paper, there's nothing to just default to. You have to make every single mark with your pencil. And so I think that lends itself to getting more animation in the nose. You can do more things just because you have to put down a line anyway. So maybe you try something weird. Whereas if you're animating a face in 3D, maybe you just let the interpolation do its job, and then you don't try stuff maybe quite as much. You try stuff in different ways. You play around in different aspects, but maybe you don't just go crazy with the nose as you might in 2D. if you come across any really interesting nose animation, that would be a fun thing to share. Leave a comment to one of the videos, this one or another one, because I think that would be a really interesting thing. Another interesting thing before we wrap up that I found is that animals tend to get even more expressions in their noses because their noses can be like whole muzzles, and then they're going to get a lot more movement there, and it's going to move around more, and you're going to get much more expressive qualities. So if you're looking for some good nose animation, you might check some of like the classic Disney stuff it's animal based, because man, they did a lot of fun stuff there. The humans too, they did. Those animators knew what they were doing. Um, but that's something that you might want to think about. Uh, oh, good. Maria says we're uploading it for this month's critique from Ferdinand. Great. That's terrific. I look forward to seeing it. I have to check that out. For anybody who doesn't know, Ferdinand over on Patreon does group mentoring, and he'll often do critiques for people and things like that. So that's an available option for you. And it's probably good to mention that now and then. Actually, there's a little scrolly dealio. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Never hurts to have that. This little scroll at the bottom now will say we have a 2D animation course, a free course that's available over at animatorisland.com. And then Patreon is available if you are looking to support Animator Island in general and get feedback and things like that. I did want to take a minute to say something related to that. Oh, Maria's heading out. Bye, Maria. But there's one thing I wanted to say real quick before we sign off. Ferdinand does an amazing job with Animator Island. It's tremendous, and he puts so much effort and work into it. So sometimes it's hard to ask for support when it's your baby and it's your thing. But I'm not gaining much from the Patreon, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just do that for him. If you really want to support Ferdinand, and I highly recommend it because he's amazing as a human being and as an artist, you can head over to Patreon, and even just a small amount really makes a difference for us, for him. Again, not really me here. I'm not asking for my own money, but it really does make a difference. And the goal is to one day have things rolling enough that he could just do Animator Island all the time, or work on his own projects and things like that. And that would be a big thing for any artist to be able to do. So if you enjoy the Animator Island content and you really like Ferdinand, as I do, consider supporting him on Patreon, because it really does make a difference for us. All right, and then lastly, we'll finish up with Alien Slug King here. Sorry about 3D questions. I'm learning 3D animation. I watch your channel because I've learned a lot from y'all's videos. Hey, I have no problem with 3D questions. I might not be able to give you the best answer of anybody, but the cool thing about animation is that no matter what kind of medium you're using, whether it's stop motion, whether it's 3D, whether it's 2D hand drawn, whether it's 2D puppet style, whatever it is, we're still going to have elements that are key core principles. And so hopefully I'll be able to at least share some thoughts on those core principles, because they're going to go through the whole thing. There's nothing new under the sun in that regard. There's animation has been chugging along for a long time now, and those principles just shine through as beacons of truth and light in the animation world. So 3D, 2D, whatever it is, glad you had an opportunity to ask some questions and talk about it. And I'm always happy to have any of those kind of questions and comments. All right, that's going to wrap things up for today. The next live stream will be later this week. As I mentioned, going to do some gesture drawing. So if you wanted to join in, feel free to do that. I don't know the day and time, but if you subscribe, then you'll be able to see that when it happens. And then Ferdinand has some things going on right now, projects and travel and things like that. So he will probably be back with you live, not later this week, but maybe the following one. Otherwise, we'll keep this train rolling until he gets back in action, and we'll keep hanging out together. All right, that's it for today. Thanks so much. I am JK from Animator Island once again, and we'll see you next time. Peace, everybody.